Welcome back to Circle City News. I'm Sophie Hostetler, and joining us today is attorney Mark Nicholson.
Attorney Mark Nicholson from the Law Office of Mark Nicholson.
Thank you for joining us and
My,
having me today. Today we're going to be talking about kinks. What are they, and the legality surrounding different kinks, especially here in Indiana, with our resident law expert, as you could say. But to start us off, what is a kink? So the word kink, I feel like a lot of people have heard it, but maybe not know exactly what it means. So people define kink as anything in the sexual world that would be considered as other. So other in terms of not normal, which I think is like a poor way of putting it because everybody has their own kinks and attractions and things they like and don't like. So I guess that's just how people define kink, is that something other than, normal vanilla sex and sexual acts. But kinks can be very passive. You can use them to spice up things in the bedroom on occasion, or they can be very routine depending on the type of person you are, what things, you're interested in, etc. All the other factors that kind of blend into that. So kink is a umbrella term of sorts when it comes to fetishes and things people like doing in like sexual play acts. So a kink would be like a broad terminology term that things like BDSM and all those other kinks kind of fall under and into, which fetish would also kind of fall into under the kink umbrella as well. And to start us off strong, I guess, we're going to go with one of the most probably popular and well-known kinks, which is going to be BDSM. The full title for BDSM stands for bondage and discipline, domination and submission, and sadism and
masochism.
masochism. Oh my gosh. Sorry. He's helping me with the big words today. So this is also a category that has very broad things underneath of that, especially since there are, it's multiple definitions within the BDSM community. It kind of intersects in a lot of different areas. So just for a few definitions, the act of dominance and submission is usually done consensually. All of these things that we're going to be talking about today are going to need to require consent in some fashion. Otherwise, you may be getting into hot water legally, if that's not obvious. So, the dominant partner would kind of pair with a submissive partner. And in BDSM, there is a power exchange. The submissive has no power versus the dominant one has all the power. And it can depend on you and your own preferences. It's able to switch back and forth or just stay between your two, basic roles, you could say. But then also within BDSM, I think some people consider the scarier side of it would be the sadism and
Masochism. S&M.
Yes, okay. S&M. We'll use that acronym. Which sadism refers to a person who enjoys inflicting pain versus masochism.
S&M.
The M side of the S&M
yes.
would refer to someone who enjoys receiving pain. And so it's kind of that duality. I don't think you would necessarily see one without the other. But probably one of the most popular kinks within the BDSM community is going to be bondage, things like rope play. And, the more intense you get with things like rope play, there's going to be things involving like suspension and different knots and tying that most of the people in the community would probably agree that you need to have some sort of mentor or have a lot of practice before really committing to more intense rope or bondage play ventures. What do you think about bondage in general, I suppose, Mark?
One of the things that Sophie mentioned, was the issue of consent. Consent is very important in the state of Indiana, especially, but there's not any kind of protection if you say the person consented and you beat them up and they told on you. The state can still prosecute. A lot of people don't know when you're talking about these words like sadism and masochism, that they actually were people. There was an author that the word sadist came from because his name, Marquis de Sade. And there was also an author that wrote a series of books that dealt with the issue of receiving pain And I think it was called, I can't remember, like something von Massic or something like that.
Right.
And it was about receiving pain. And so that's how these two words came into existence. A lot of people think of them just as words, but not associating with real people. But there really were people years and years ago.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's where these words actually derive from. But getting back to the issue of like the bondage, restraining someone against their will, obviously could be criminal confinement in the state of Indiana. I'm known as the battery man for my focus on battery cases. And like I said, if you are engaging in this kind of impact play where you're hitting someone, it is important to have consent and also safe words so the person will know that, hey, this is the time to stop. Otherwise, you may find yourself needing the services of me.
Yeah, and with impact play where you're just discussing those, that involves things like flogging or whips or and often you'll see like riding cropped at a sex store or something like that. So that would be considered some sort of like impact play. And Mark, what if you're doing some impact play and you have a therapist you see regularly and they notice bruises on you? Is that going to be for people who like are mandatory reporters, do you think that would be an issue of legality in itself, especially if it was already consensual?
Yeah, so that's another important thing is you may want to, well, I encourage you, if you are into this kind of activity and it is something where you may receive marks, that you find a therapist or a doctor that is kind of fetish friendly or kink friendly, that will not see that mark on you and automatically think either you're self-harming or you are being abused by your spouse and need to report, and then cause all kinds of host of trouble. So there is a website that does focus on fetish friendly, kink friendly therapists and doctors and things like that. So
yeah, so we can post that.
Yep. Sure.
And the link or whatever later. What about things like sensation play? Things like blindfold, using things like wax play, things that like are, so sensation play would be like blindfold or wax play where it focuses on one sensation or one sense to kind of heighten your other senses to get momentum flowing, I guess, in the bedroom.
Yeah, so I mean, wax play, I guess technically would be someone dropping, hot wax on you that, could be considered another form of battery if the person didn't consent. In this case, they would consent normally. I don't believe that the wax really leaves a mark on the person's body.
Well, hopefully it wouldn't be hot enough to actually
burn the skin and stuff like that. So, and the person doesn't actually burn you with the candle, if they're dropping the wax on you. And also with the blindfold, once again, if it's consensual, obviously there's nothing there. Non-consensual, blindfold someone against their will and they can't get out, can't see, in Indiana, criminal confinement charge. So yeah.
So would that be like a similar charge to like a kidnapping? Is that kind of what that
kidnapping is definitely a different charge, but I do like that idea that the blindfolding could be another form of kidnapping if if the person couldn't see. Yeah. Right. So that could be a potential charge too. I usually normally think of the most common in Indiana is when someone can't leave a space, is the state usually charges like a criminal confinement.
Like you just can't get away.
Yeah, you can't, like if you're in a room and or someone holds you against your will, basically that would be criminal confinement. So if you're blindfolded, hey, I can't see, you're holding me against my will, boom, criminal confinement, state of Indiana.
That would be crazy. So another one of the kinks that kind of fall into the BDSM category that is also very popular with people who are sugar daddies, sugar mommies, sugar babies, etc. in that realm is financial domination, which the domination side in this type of particular fetish would be, over someone's finances. And that may be whether you give someone else total control over your own finances, or it can, I would like to think of it as like a term of like a spectrum. Like you could go really intense where it's like, I own your bank account, it's mine now, versus, some of the lower ones where it's like, you have to buy me this, or you have to give me an allowance, or you're on a really strict budget and things like that. What is the legality?
Yeah, so obviously if this is two consenting adults, so we're kind of having a little bit of fun with it and talking about, what could happen if it's not a consenting person, right? blackmailing someone, extortion would be another one. Maybe even some kind of like defamation, like, hey, which would all fall in there. Like, I'm going to put this stuff out here. It's all bad about you, defaming you. And then it's like, if you want me to take it down, then you have to give me some money. So that
Right.
kind of financial. And then if you're going into someone's bank account, then it could be, theft if you're going in there and taking the money without their consent. But obviously, with financial domination, these are two consenting adults. When you mentioned sugar baby, it reminded me. It seems like when I was a kid that there was these little milk chocolate things, and I thought they were called sugar babies. It was some kind of candy.
I
So
know what you're
I'm gonna have to
saying.
Google that and see if it was called sugar babies. It seems like I remember getting those when I went to the movies and had
No,
it's not sugar babies.
I don't know if that's what it's called, but I feel like I know what you're talking about. I feel like I've
Well, I'm
seen
gonna
them.
Google it
We'll
and
Google it
find
afterwards.
out if
We'll
there's
let
a
you guys
candy
know.
called sugar babies. But obviously, the sugar baby she's talking about is different than the candy.
Sure,
So,
sure. Which, just to kind of touch on the sugar baby, sugar daddy, mommy situation, even though it's not really included in my list here, what would be the kind of the legality? Let's say, like, I have a sugar daddy, we have an agreement that was
ah,
consensual, and what if, like, all of a sudden I don't want to have anything to do with them anymore? And things like he's threatening like revenge porn or to expose me to like my
yeah,
family or my parents or
yeah.
whoever. I'm just
So,
curious what the legality would maybe kind of be around that.
so once again, Indiana does have a revenge porn law. So if he was going to distribute these intimate images of you against your consent, there's a way that you could have him charged. Also, you could sue for defamation. But one of the things you said, Sophie, that reminded me of this kind of sugar relationship is technically, if someone like the police were to find out, they could maybe try to charge someone with prostitution and soliciting a prostitute, because if you're giving someone money, engaging for sex, that would be the definition of prostitution, which is illegal in the state of Indiana. Unfortunately, I believe in this decriminalization and legalization of sex work, because
Right.
if two consenting adults want to exchange money for sex, then they should be able to do so, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, I was just curious, but that's a good point too. I didn't even think about that. Kind of diving back into our kinks here. Humiliation or erotic humiliation is kind of the idea that the person being humiliated kind of reclaims their humiliation through, for lack of a better word, like getting off on it. And humiliation play kind of falls into the BDSM category because again, there is a exchange of power there. The person being humiliated does not have any power. You could probably also think of them more of like as a submissive. But one of the most common forms of humiliation play is kind of the cuckolding, which stereotypically it's usually thought of as like a man watching his wife or his girlfriend or partner having sex or doing sexual acts with another man, and kind of the humiliation of either like, oh, I'm not good enough to get her off, or I'm not good enough for her to have sex with, versus like the general humiliation that like their partner is seeking someone else out to fulfill those needs, I guess, which has always been kind of mind-boggling for me personally. No shade, but what do you think about the
So,
humiliation
so
aspect?
humiliation obviously could fall under, on the criminal side, it could fall under harassment if the person is being humiliated, and you're leaving bad messages, sending bad messages, just harassing them. Maybe even defamation if you're putting out stuff in public. You could be defaming their character. The part where this cuckolding part, I would say in Indiana, if someone's married, we don't have a law against, oh, this person is adultery. So there's not really a
Right.
crime of adultery, but there is one against bigamy. So if you're married, you don't want to get it in there and get married to someone else under the law. I guess you can have many religious marriages you want, because but legally getting married in the state of Indiana, you can't get in there and marry multiple people, because then that would be polygamy and
Sure.
that would be against the law.
Okay, cool. Kind of went over sensation play. Ooh, this was the one we were waiting to get to. So, exhibitionism is a type of play where um, you are turned on or get off on the fact that someone is watching you commit sexual acts. So, kind of like what the word says, exhibition. It's like that style where you're kind of like exposing yourself. And this may be whether it's in public or semi-public areas of just like flashing or, you know, giving your boyfriend a blowjob in the car when you're driving on the highway. I feel like that's maybe not like a semi-public example, but that was really interesting. And then on the flip side of exhibitionism, it's called voyeurism, which is a fetish where you receive sexual gratification through watching other people have sex, usually live, because I feel like, you know, people who watch porn, that's kind of like not thought of necessarily as voyeurism. But voyeurism would be considered the complement to exhibitionism. So it's like one gets off on being watched and one gets off on watching, which I think is interesting. But the whole public to semi-public ordeal does sound like it could get you in a little bit of hot water legally.
Yeah, it's obviously, you know, if you're having sex and or doing sexual acts in public, and there is a law against that. So if you get caught, you know, you can get charged with this crime. Now, I've had people that have pulled off on the side of the road, urinated, and the officer happens to be driving by, sees them, and arrested them for like public nudity. It's kind of like, really, you know, we want the guy to have an accident in his pants. But there is a law against that. On the flip side, voyeurism, which, you know, there's a proverbial like the peeping tom.
Right,
So if
right. I didn't even
someone,
think of that.
yeah, if someone is like getting off on like looking at other people, if they're doing it and they're peeping in the window of someone's house. A few years ago, there was not, you know, there was not really like a law against like, you know, apparently like looking up a woman's skirt when if you're in a public place. So like women walking upstairs and a guy underneath
Right.
and might be able to see up her dress. And with all these cameras and things, there was a guy that was like videotaping underneath women's, you know, clothing in public. And of course, there was a huge outrage about it because I think it was putting on porn sites and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've seen stuff online about.
Yeah, and then, you know, now there's, you know, kind of law, so you don't want to get in there and look at someone's private part without their consent.
Yeah, I feel like consent is like the key in that.
Always.
But also, especially, I feel like with the exhibitionism, you would have to be in the community and like in a local community where it's like, you know, they have a space. It's like they know everyone who's going in. You know what I mean? Though it's like, would there ever, would you think that would be allowed legally? Like if you had a space, like an event center, it's like these people are going to have sex and we're all going to watch and it's like a closed event. Would that be legal?
Yeah, there are, you know,
I know this probably, they have to exist somewhere.
Yeah, there are places in Indianapolis and throughout Indiana where, you know, there people can have you know sex in public. Oftentimes it's, I think sometimes sometimes the thrill of maybe the risk of getting caught for some people. So you know, going to someone's house to have like a play party and people are watching you have sex, you know, for most people that would probably be suffice, but there are some that, you know, like the idea of, hey, let's have sex, you know, in some public place where, you know, maybe we don't get caught, maybe we do. So that could cause obviously issues if they end up getting caught.
Right. Moving on to our next one. It's very tried and true, as I would say, is just like role playing. There's a lot of types of role playing, you know, teacher student, nurse patient, pool boy, madam of the house type situations.
I want to interrupt on that one because I like the idea of the teacher student. Obviously, if this is role play, but in real life, teacher student, that can get, especially if it's you know, high school, that can get you in trouble because you know, the underage, and then also you're a position of authority, even if they're 16, because that's the age of consent in Indiana. So if you're 16 years old, then, you know, you can think, oh, well, I can have sex with this older person, but in their position of authority, like a teacher. And then if you're in college, sometimes the colleges, they have, you know, rules against, you know, fraternizing with, you know, the students and things. But teacher student, obviously not good. Employer, staff, charged with sexual you know, they could open themselves up for not charges, but allegations of like sexual harassment and things like that. So those were the two that I was thinking of.
What do you think of another form of like role play is called age play, where it doesn't necessarily have to be like one's older and one's younger. It can be like a large spectrum of like, oh, your ages, I guess. But one of them kind of talks about sorry, I'm going to butcher the name. Autonopiophilia.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is.
All right.
Which is also known as paraphilic infantilism. So it's like the fetish where someone derives sexual pleasure from pretending to be or being treated as a baby.
Okay.
And surprisingly, the research I was doing on it doesn't necessarily have to involve sexual play at all for this particular type of kink. Which it doesn't sound like it would necessarily be against the law, especially, if obviously we're talking about like consensual adults, because I don't know anyone in their right mind who wouldn't agree to that consensually. You know what I mean? Like, so I just thought that was an interesting one in general. I remember watching like a CSI episode way when I was like a teenager, and then the guy that was dead was into age play, and he was dressed as a baby and had a diaper on, and all the CSIs were going crazy about it. But side bit, but
one of the things about this is just recently, I think it was last year, they opened up like an adult baby store I think in Carmel or something, and
it's gotta be Carmel.
Yeah, and then there's people were outraged, like, oh, and they had all these petitions and things like that. I think they ended up shutting it down. I'd have to look to see if it was shut down, but people were really outraged that they had this adult baby store in Carmel where adults wanted to go up there and buy like Pampers or whatever, not realizing that sometimes people that have incontinence issues may want a bigger diaper. And then once again, if someone wants to dress up as a baby, yeah, whatever, what I'm saying, yeah, just go it. And so better than them going and stealing like baby's clothes from the store and then wearing that stuff. But anyway,
right,
yeah.
Well, and I feel like a lot of kinks, especially ones that are more taboo to talk about in general, especially, have a lot of stigma associated with them of like, oh, wait, you like that, or you're into that, so let's make sure also that we're not like kink shaming anyone necessarily. Everyone's got something weird they're into or have done at one point in their life or another, I'm pretty positive. So just something to keep in mind. We're trying not to kink shame anyone here, especially as we get into our last few. Urophilia, which is a fancy name for golden showers or water sports, as some would call it, having to do with urination. This is, again, relating to BDSM because there is usually some sort of exchange in that power balance. And there is a degree of like domination and submission due to that. And then the other one that's kind of like ties with it is clismophilia, which is a sexual arousal by an enema, which if you don't know what an enema is, it's like a medical device where you insert like water into your anus essentially to like get things moving out of there. But that is also a kink, which I was not previously aware of before doing this.
So with backing up really quick to age play, also with that, there's an issue of people that are older fantasizing about it, younger people, the issue of sexual misconduct with minor or child molestation. So those are actual crimes if the person is a certain age and the other person is under the age of 16 or lower.
Right.
That is a crime. Moving on to the urination and enemas. Well, there's a thing in Indiana, battery by bodily waste. And so if the person wasn't consenting and you end up peeing on them, that's considered bodily waste. And definitely if you defecate on them or you take it and throw it on them, once again, that would be battery by bodily waste.
Yeah, definitely would. Which, just while you were talking about that, I was thinking about how maybe age play and that infantilism is probably connected more to the urination fetish of like changing the diaper and everything. Okay. So a lot of these, like I said kind of earlier, are very intersectional. They tend to lap over one another, and they're all not necessarily related, but have a lot to do with each other. Pregnancy.
Yeah.
So pregnancy kinks.
Yeah.
So it can include more than just the general eroticization of like having sex with a pregnant person, but it can also include the sensuality of like the swollen ankles, the lactation and like things that are just symptoms of pregnancy that can be part of a kink as well. It's not like you have to be like a super big pregnant woman to.
Obviously, I'm a man, so I can't get pregnant. But I would think that most people that are probably into the pregnancy fetish are probably people that can't get pregnant. Because I don't. Some women's bodies change and things like that. She probably doesn't feel comfortable. In Indiana and most states, I would imagine, although I'm not licensed anywhere outside of Indiana to practice law. If you batter a woman and she's pregnant, then it can be enhanced, and also you could end up. If you end up killing the fetus, it can be another charge. So if someone is pregnant, that can be an aggravator if you, batter them and injure them and they're pregnant.
Sure, which makes sense. Foot fetishes, so marked by sexual interest in feet. This can range anywhere from like very specific aspects of the feet, like you really like arches, you really like toes, you really like bunions, whatever it may be specifically about feet. But then I've also seen online people who, like feet in specific types of shoes. There's like a whole pedicure section on like foot fetishes. But also one I didn't even think of until I saw it on like TikTok or something was this girl who stomps on different things, different items, whether it be bugs or food, or I think even one episode she might have done Legos. I think she was wearing shoes for that one because I wouldn't want to stomp on Legos barefoot. Right. But I guess that's like a whole other market of like foot fetish. It's like stomping, which I think also could play into kind of that BDSM dominant submissive role of like, I've seen things where someone's like, oh, stomp on me, or it's like kind of been like a running, I guess a joke of sorts with some of the younger generations on like the internet that I've seen, where it's like, oh, I just want like a goth girl to stomp on me, and like, so I think that kind of connects to the foot fetish thing too a little bit, which I was like, wow.
Yeah, so I mean, who doesn't love a good foot, right? So it's kind of like, this is what gets us from point A to point B. I can think, matter of fact, earlier today, when I was on my way to court, I had to sit down because in my right shoe, there was some little small little rock pebble in there, and it just irritated my whole entire body. You know what I'm saying? Just the whole entire body. It's just amazing that the something that small can, cause that much problem in your whole entire body, mainly because, all these nerve endings on your feet.
Right.
And, when people were standing on our feet, oh, my feet hurt because I'm running, and there's all this billion-dollar industry with shoes, making sure you got these good running shoes. And recently, I think last year I bought my first pair of Hokas because I was like, they look really, really funny, but they're really like walking on clouds. So I think that the issue when it comes to feet, everybody has them for the most part. Of course, if you lost your leg, lost your feet, through diabetes, something like that. But I think everybody can kind of relate to the issue of how important feet are. And some people, obviously, when it comes to that, they're like, oh, I can't stand them, I'm ticklish, or they look ugly, whatever. The problem under the law is when people end up stealing shoes, because we've had people that have stolen women's shoes to satisfy their foot fetish. And so that is the crime that is normally associated, not normally associated with people that have a foot fetish, but people that may have a foot fetish, if they're, which obviously you got bigger issues if you're stealing, because that's like kleptomania or something like that, but is the stealing of shoes.
I didn't even think about that, but I guess it makes sense, especially, if you have a stalker or someone that can take no for an answer, and they're like, well, I need to get a hold of their shoes.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know.
The last fetish I have on our list to talk about today is cytophilia. May have butchered that one too, but it's also known as food play, which I feel like maybe people wouldn't look at as quite as scary or as intense as some of the other ones we've talked about today, because it's a fetish that individuals are turned on by different types of food, which I feel like it's been like a myth or something before. I've heard it's like, oysters are an aphrodisiac and you have to like eat certain foods to be sexy or like set the mood, but that's kind of the idea with food play. But it can vary depending on your own personal taste of what you like, your partner likes, or whatever. It can be anywhere from like fruit or like oysters and lobster, like I said, or caviar, all the way to like chocolate and whipped cream, or even like freezing. I feel like that kind of plays into like ice play too a little bit, you know what I mean? Yeah. But like another sensation play, or even like alcohol, like champagne, setting that mood, making it just like a sexy vibe, which I think is interesting and like an easy place for people to start out. But you have to be careful, especially. I feel like one of the things like that could get you into trouble legally would be like, what if you say you're meeting up with somebody new and you get all this like cool food and then you're feeding somebody and they're allergic to shellfish or something. You know what I mean? That's the only thing I could think about. But what are your thoughts, Mark?
Well, me, I love food. So the idea that I love to cook, I love to eat. So, give me a good old foodgasm any day. Food is just great. I love my ribs and I love veggies too, like fish. Um, so that one last on the list for a reason, because it was one of the harder ones for me to kind of figure out kind of like a legal angle for someone that has this kind of food fetish, food kink, because, I think most everybody loves some type of food. And if you love food and you want to incorporate it into your bedroom, it can be kind of messy depending on what food it is. But it's really kind of difficult to think of something other than, like you said, the issue of go ahead, you got.
I thought of one.
Okay, what is it?
Okay, it kind of has to play in with the humiliation kink a little bit, but like, and also kind of maybe like bondage, BDSM, like I said, very intersectional. But what if like, again, I probably tell us on like CSI or something crazy from a long time ago that probably wasn't, based on real events or anything. But what if you're doing some sort of bondage play and food play where you're kind of like tied up and you're like being force fed food?
Well, that goes back to the criminal confinement,
right?
So, and also we really didn't talk about with the bondage. There's also the choking, so the gagging, and that's in Indiana that there's a statute, strangulation. So if you're choking someone against their will and cut off the airway by doing that, so maybe by the using the food and you're forcing this food down their throat and you start choking and stuff, maybe that could be kind of a form of strangulation if you're holding their neck and so there's something that could
like
could
start
stretch,
and you just very stretched. But I was just like, as you were talking, I was like, oh, what about this random scenario that probably has happened before, but isn't like common by any means. But our list today is not by any means comprehensive. I definitely recommend doing your own research and online and maybe even in person, finding, like we said earlier, there are specific therapists, sex therapists, and kink professionals out there. Maybe we can try and find a little bit of a list or like a link to drop below this episode for you guys too if you have more interest. But then where can you find a kink community here in Indiana? So with what brief research I have done, I would recommend the fetlife.com. That's probably one of the most popular sources. I've looked on Reddit and on a bunch of other forum sites of like, where do people find communities and stuff? And a lot of people just kept bringing up FetLife. It is free to join. You can get a free membership. It's free to message people, comment on events, things like that. They do take donations, and that can like boost your profile and give you like special access to things. But I couldn't tell you much about that. But it is free. There's other sites, like Facebook. You just have to do a little bit of research if you're really willing to like dig in and try to find a real community. But I would definitely look into FetLife. There's a couple different Facebook groups I found, like the Indiana Leather Club and the Indianapolis Kink Society. There's also a group called Clubhouse 2050, which is more of a swingers group. If that's your thing, that's cool. But like I said, doing your own research is always a good thing, and it's always great to take your own opinions and ideas into account when searching for things that have to do with you personally. Obviously, don't take my random opinion for an expert or anything like that. But awesome. Any other thoughts?
No, I mean, I think you covered a lot of them, and I was glad that I was able to kind of creatively link up one of those fetishes to one particular, or sometimes several statutes.
Right.
So, but it doesn't mean if you're engaging in this that you're going to be charged with a crime or anything like that. We're just kind of having a little bit of fun with the kink and is it legal, and then saying, hey, here's a way for it not to be legal. But most people that are engaging in this activity, law-abiding citizens, they know what they're doing, and they should never have really any trouble with the law.
Right, right. And just kind of to touch again on consent is probably one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, when exploring your own kinks and having your own personal experiences. BDSM is the key when it comes to your own safety, your partner safety, and building trust, which is a really big thing within a lot of the kink communities, is trust and being able to trust each other. Because I know a lot of those types of BDSM and leather communities and things, they try to keep abuse out of their communities, and it's well talked about that, from the research I've done. But yeah, stay safe out there, guys, and happy kink exploring, I guess. So thanks for listening, and thanks to everybody who supports our podcast. Feel free to listen on our website, circlecitynews.org, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else that plays fine podcasts. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
All right. My pleasure.